So I'm Ziggy, I'm a VP at HSS Health. HSS Health is part of HSS, Hospital of Special Surgery, and the role there is to create new technology companies on behalf of the hospital. Prior lives, I'm a surgeon, also boarded in internal medicine, a management consultant, investor in biotech, and before this was with a remote diagnostics company. And speaking of before cocktails as the last of the day on remote patient monitoring, I bet you really wanted a heavily detailed talk all about the physics, the specific examples and numbers, but instead I thought I'd actually do it thinking through art, film, and philosophy, and thinking about remote patient monitoring as a past, present, and future view, and thinking, well, where does it really come from, and where is it going, and what does it really mean? So this is one of my favorite paintings. It's called The Doctor. It's from 1891. And what you can see here is what you could say is remote patient monitoring in its original form, probably through the entire history of medicine, and arguably what actually still happens now in New York City in 2023 is this would be some version that patients will get, if they can even get access to it, of remote patient monitoring. And I'd ask to look closer at this and what is it that's missing here, or that we want to see in a future version of remote patient monitoring that would really advance healthcare? And as I look at it, I see really three things. One, this is very labor intensive. That doctor has to be there. We don't know how long he's going to be there. It's clear he's there in the middle of the night, and he probably has many other patients either at night or the next day to see. So that's probably something that we'd want to see different in the future. The other is, what information can he actually take in? He's really reduced down to visual cues. And maybe he can see the skin color. Maybe there's signs of sweating or fever. Maybe there's some rash or abnormality. Maybe respiratory rate. There's not too much else that he can really take in there. And the third is the objectivity. He's really relying only on his own visual cues, prior interpretations. And that's, again, something that we think in the future you'd want to get more objective. So I'd ask to keep this in mind as we go through thinking about how patient monitoring and remote patient monitoring has evolved. Towards the present could be any of these things. They're probably all still in use, but they also have varying length durations of histories. The typical outpatient center from the 1700s, the doctor's visit we've seen. The telegram, I think 1884, original blood pressure cuff, 1881, initial telephone, 1876, questionnaires, 1838, but they evolve, and then you can get to more digital questionnaires, internet, 1983, glucose meter, 1963, different versions of digital devices. Then you get to your smartphones 10 years ago, and your watches and other types of more consumer-driven devices in the last 5 years. And we can see there's clearly some degree of evolution from left towards right and over time, even though all of these can still be used at some point today. And I was thinking, well, what are really the high-level trends that you see through them? And I really thought there's 10 things that show up. And feel free to shout out as you interpret any of these. So going from left to bottom right. Size, they get smaller and smaller. They get more and more remote. Third, they move more from hard to digital and online rather than in-person and physical. Fourth, they tend to be more and more multi-tentacled, trying to take in more measurements than just one at the same time. 5, more continuous rather than episodic moments. 6, this is going back to high school physics. It's the equation for speed, so distance over time. But they get quicker and quicker to transmit and measure. 7 is accuracy. That's actually the Citizen Caliber 001 watch, considered the most accurate in the world. 1 second per year is all it loses. 8, scale. Thinking about methods that can measure on multiple people at the same time, as well as just multiple parameters. Number 9, if anyone recognizes that band, it's The Cure, but it's a move away from The Cure to more preventative monitoring rather than just when you're actually ill. And 10 is ownership. Progressively, there's more and more owners to the remote patient monitoring data, including the patient themselves. And so these 10 trends, I think, can explain a lot of what's evolved and probably will continue to evolve over time going in towards the future. And in thinking of the future, it won't just be these 10 trends, but there's also just new waves of innovation and new paradigms that will in the end be integrated into remote patient monitoring, some of which are happening now, some of which will come. So there's 3 that came to my mind. In talking about the future, the fun thing is that nobody remembers what you get wrong, but they'll just remember maybe the one thing that you say that's right. And so through 3 films, these are, I think, 3 big trends and waves that will be incorporated into remote patient monitoring. On the left, artificial intelligence. I think that becomes more and more intuitive as to how it gets used. Instead of simple relaying of static measurements, the interpretation can be taken from the provider through to be automated effectively. And then if you add in machine learning on top of that, maybe you don't need a provider at all. Terrible film though, by the way. Number 2, The Matrix. And this is thinking about the metaverse and alternative universes where, or alternative metaverses where you might have your avatar that you could be monitored through, or through a different modality, having your provider monitor yourself. And third, through nanotechnology and robotics, particularly thinking about, we've seen the devices are still tend to be big and clunky. They're getting smaller, as we've seen. But with nanotechnology, you'd look more then at implants and things that are more, that can deliver that constant data. And that is a much better film. In thinking also then about the evolution and towards the future, what actually, do we just want to keep going more in a simple technology-driven way and just adding more and more technology because we can? But what does it mean? And in the grander scope of healthcare, is it actually what we want to deliver better health? And on this, I thought of 3 things that are worth considering more on a philosophical level about remote patient monitoring, which will clearly continue to stay. So the first one is thinking about Jeremy Bentham's panopticon. So this was something that he'd written in 1783. So Jeremy Bentham was an English philosopher famous for the concept of utilitarianism. And on the right, you can see his mummified body, which is still in the lobby of University College London because he wanted everybody still to see it. But amongst his many things that he thought about prisons and how best you could monitor prisoners all the time and at scale. And so he developed this design, for which there are still prisons in the world based on this that have been built. But it's the idea with remote patient monitoring, we would effectively be living in some type of panopticon if you take it to that extreme end. And would we want to be? What does that mean for privacy? You can see in the center, there's a watchtower. Who is that watchtower? It might be the provider, could be central agencies, could be bad actor. So there's just something to consider as we shift into that more remote, continuous, multiple parameter, digital sense of monitoring for prevention more than cure. A second philosophical strand to think about, and this is from T.S. Eliot, who was an English poet and philosopher, who in 1934 wrote, as you can see, "Where is the wisdom we have lost in the knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in the information?" And we've heard before that 30% of all data generated in the world now is healthcare data. And a lot of that will be from remote patient monitoring. But as you measure more and more continuously all the time on everyone, where does that really get us? Because that's all information, but what's the knowledge? I would think that the knowledge is actually, does it represent disease? What disease does it represent? But even the disease, the wisdom is really actually what's the way to better healthcare, because that's really what remote patient monitoring should be doing, rather than just giving numbers and figures or providing a picture. It should actually be driving towards better healthcare. So from here, I take a sense of thinking about remote patient monitoring. What do we really want to take rather than just everything all the time? And maybe that will change our perception of what we do want to measure or how much we want to measure. Third is through Martin Heidegger, who's more contemporary, and in 1954 wrote a lot about man's relationship with technology, including the essence of technology is by no means anything technological. And really, what he meant by that was that technology doesn't drive itself, but it's actually through man's desire to get scientific precision of the world around itself. And that's the way that, as technology innovators here, we think about, but there's something to think about the consequences of that. And with remote patient monitoring, if your devices with artificial intelligent algorithms and nanotechnology through the metaverse can measure all of that, what's our relationship with a provider, with a healthcare, or even with each other? Heidegger wrote about technology changes man's relationship. Actually, how do you think about your fellow human being as well? And so do we now become more numbers, or do we still become people and patients? So that, I think these are just running themes to continue. But to bring it full circle, in conclusion, is thinking about, well, we've got the past, and we think back to that image of the doctor there, and we've got these trends, these 10 trends, and then these 3 big waves, and these considerations to take us to the future. But what's really stopping us from getting from there to there? And on that, I end with the great American philosopher, Jerry Maguire, and to say it's actually, a lot of it is about the money, and in particular, in 2 ways. 1, for the development of all the technology and to apply it, but 2, particularly reimbursement remains really the big challenge and there's more and more CPT codes coming out for remote patient monitoring. The reimbursement amounts are not as much as others. And so but the question really is then about the value in getting, when you get that reimbursement, I think people will see that. But feeding back into maybe what T.S. Eliot said, which is we want to see value also for that investment.